A body appears where none should exist. Welcome to Cafe Echoes. I am your host, Silas Graves. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Now, the story begins. It was at the kind of house party that persuades one, for a few days at least, that England has been arranged by a benevolent hand. Lawns like green velvet, roses disciplined into obedience, and a staff moving as noiselessly as thoughts one would rather not speak aloud. Lady Imogen Satterthwaite had gathered her friends to Hawthorne Grange with that air of gracious certainty which makes a guest feel simultaneously flattered and faintly assessed. Hercule Poirot, I should explain, had been persuaded, by me in the first instance, that a weekend in the country might prove restorative. My old friend's work had been heavy of late, and though he maintained that the mind, mon ami, is like the moustache, it requires attention, I could see that he relished a change of scene, provided the scene was properly symmetrical. He complained, of course, at once. The carriage drive curved too casually. The flowers in the hall were arranged with a reckless abandon. The butler, Jenkins, set down Poirot's hat with a fraction too much confidence. Yet Poirot's eyes were bright, and in the drawing-room he accepted a cup of chocolate as though it were a diplomatic tribute. Among the guests were Sir Alister Vane, a retired colonial administrator with a bronze face and an opinion on every subject. His daughter, Miss Celia Vane, whose quietness suggested either shyness or strategy. The Reverend Dr. Bellingham, a scholarly man with a soft voice and a hard gaze. Mrs. Dacre, a widow of comfortable means and uncomfortable curiosity. And Mr. Lucian Harrow, Lady Imogen's private secretary, slim as a pen stroke and twice as sharp. There was, too, Captain Giles Fenwick, an old comrade of mine from the service, who greeted me with an enthusiasm that made the chandeliers tremble. Fenwick had brought his fiancée, Miss Verity Kent, a modern young woman in a silver dress who looked as if she were perpetually deciding whether to laugh or to leave. Lastly, there was the host's nephew, Mr. Rupert Satterthwaite, a handsome fellow with idle hands and an eager smile that did not quite reach his eyes. The talk at dinner ran, as such talk always does, upon money, marriages, and miseries at a safe remove. Yet beneath it I sensed a current, something unvoiced but present. Lady Imogen, for all her ease, watched her guests as though she were counting them. Harrow's pen, I noticed, never quite stopped moving. If he was not writing, he was mentally drafting. Sir Alister drank too much claret and too little cheer. Miss Celia scarcely touched her food, and Rupert, while charming, kept glancing toward the tall, closed door of the library, as though it might open of its own accord. After the ladies withdrew, we men lingered over port. Dr. Bellingham spoke of ancient tombs and the superstitions that cling to them. Fenwick, with a laugh, told a story of a corpse that had been mislaid during a flood, only to turn up in a billiard room 3 miles away. Mrs. Dacre, who had returned early, contrary to all tradition, declared that nothing was more unsettling than a body where it did not belong. "A body should be where it is meant to be," she said, and with a shiver that seemed half enjoyment. Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Ah, madame," he murmured, "but who decides where it is meant to be? The dead do not make their appointments." I laughed, and so did the others, though I noted that Harrow's eyes flickered just for an instant to Lady Imogen's face. Later, the company dispersed. Some went to the card table, others to the music room, where Miss Verity played a piece by Debussy as though she were daring the notes to follow her. Poirot and I retired early, for he declared that fresh air was a fraud, and that the English countryside existed chiefly to give rheumatism an excuse. It was perhaps 11:30 when the house gave its first small sign of disturbance. A muffled cry, distant, quickly swallowed by walls and carpets. I sat up in bed, listening. Poirot, in the adjoining room, it called softly, "Hastings." "Yes," I answered. Another sound followed, A hurried footfall, then the sharp, incredulous ring of a bell. A moment later came a frantic knocking at our door. I pulled on a dressing gown and opened it to find Jenkins, the butler, pale beneath his professional composure. "Captain Hastings," he said, "Mr. Harrow requests, begging your pardon, he requests Monsieur Poirot at once. There has been an occurrence." Poirot appeared behind me, immaculate even in a robe, as if he had slept in an attitude of readiness. He smoothed his cuffs carefully. "An occurrence," he repeated gently. "That is a word people use when they do not wish to name the thing." Jenkins swallowed. "It is in the library, sir." "In the library," Poirot said, and his eyes narrowed, and not with excitement, but with that keen attentiveness that always precedes his most dangerous politeness. "Then, my friend, we shall go and see what has happened where it should not have happened." We followed Jenkins along the corridor, our footsteps smothered by carpet. The house that had seemed serene an hour ago now felt tight-lipped, as if every panel were listening. Light spilled from beneath the library door, and with it the low murmur of voices, strained, incredulous. Harrow stood just inside, his neat hair disturbed, his collar unbuttoned. Lady Imogen sat rigid by the fire, one hand pressed to her throat. Sir Alister was at the window with his shoulders squared. Miss Celia hovered near him, white as paper. Fenwick looked ready to seize someone by the lapels if only he knew whom. On the rug, between the table and the bookcases, lay a man. He was sprawled at an awkward angle, as if dropped rather than fallen. His face had the waxen stillness of death, and I knew at once he was not one of our party. A dark pool spread beneath his head into the Persian pattern. Poirot paused on the threshold. His eyes travelled not to the body alone, but to the chair slightly askew, the curtain that did not hang straight, the decanter nearer the table's edge than good sense allowed. Only then did he advance and kneel, careful not to touch. "Do not approach," he said mildly, and Fenwick, who had taken a step, stopped. Poirot's gaze moved over the man's hands, collar, shoes. He leaned close, inhaling, then straightened with a faint tightening of the lips. Harrow spoke quickly. "He was not here. I came to fetch a ledger from my desk. I opened the door and there he was. And I rang at once." Jenkins added, "Dr. Bristow has been sent for, sir, and Sergeant O'Leary." Lady Imogen whispered, "In my library," as though the offence were intrusion rather than death. Poirot rose, brushed his sleeve, and turned to Harrow. "At what time did you come for this ledger?" Harrow glanced at the clock. "About 11:15. "And you found him when?" "Perhaps 10 minutes later. I cannot say exactly." Poirot's eyes rested on him. "Yet you rang the bell immediately. That is not the action of a man who does not know the time." A flush rose in Harrow's cheekbones. "Very well. It was 22 minutes past. I looked at the clock because I meant to be in bed before midnight." "Everything is important," said Poirot gently. He looked to Lady Imogen. "You have not been in here since dinner, madame?" "Certainly not." "Mr. Harrow keeps his papers. I do not meddle." Sir Alister broke in. "This is outside business. Some vagrant, some blackmailer. Let the police cart him away." Dr. Bellingham bent over the body with professional curiosity, and then straightened. "Recently dead," he said. "A blow, perhaps. There is blood, but I see no obvious weapon." Poirot's head tilted. "You see something?" Bellingham hesitated. His fingers, stained, ink, I think, and there is a faint smell. "Lamp oil?" Rupert Satterthwaite laughed too loudly. "We are discussing his fingers while he lies there." "It is grotesque," Poirot agreed. "Grotesque is often instructive." He addressed the room. "Did anyone hear a cry?" A silence followed, thick as dust. I felt each face trying to remember and, at the same time, deciding what it would be safe to say. Fenwick said at last, "I heard something, a muffled sound. I was in the billiard room. I went to the corridor, but it stopped." Miss Verity, standing near the doorway, spoke calmly. I heard a thud, like a heavy book. I assumed it was nothing. Poirot looked at her. You assume quickly, mademoiselle. I prefer it to assuming too late, she returned, and did not drop her eyes. Poirot moved to the desk. The blotter lay open, the pen placed neatly across it. A glass of water stood untouched. One drawer was not fully closed, as though pulled open and pushed back in haste. Who shut the door? Poirot asked. I did, Harrow said, when I ran for Jenkins. And when you first came, it was shut? Yes. Poirot nodded and stood very still, as though listening to the room's shape. This man was brought here, or lured here, and he did not choose this rug for his last moments. Someone wished the library to be the stage. Sir Alister's mouth tightened. Stage? For what? For all of you, Poirot replied. A message, perhaps, or a distraction. Tell me, who among you is certain that nothing in this room concerns them? No one answered. From outside came the faint crunch of wheels on gravel. Relief and dread moved together through the group. Poirot turned to me. Hastings, observe their faces when the official gentlemen enter. They will look at the dead. I will look at the living. It is among the living that the truth hides best. And as we waited, I understood with a sudden chill that the stranger's presence was not the beginning of the affair, but its first deliberate move. Somewhere in the house, a door clicked softly, like a thought being locked away, and when I saw Poirot's eyes flicker, as if he too had heard it. The arrival of Sergeant O'Leary and Dr. Bristow brought with it a brisk professionalism that altered the atmosphere at once. Lamps were adjusted, doors closed, and the body was examined with a practiced economy of movement. The doctor confirmed what Poirot already knew. Death had been swift, caused by a heavy blow to the back of the head, likely delivered by an object not yet discovered. The time of death, he estimated, lay somewhere between 10:45 and 11:10. That narrows nothing, Sir Alister muttered. On the contrary, Poirot replied. It narrows the people who can lie convincingly. The sergeant questioned each of us in turn, noting names, movements, alibis. Most accounts were tidy enough. Card games, music, billiards, solitary reading, and yet I noticed how often eyes shifted toward the library door, as though the room exerted a pull of its own. Miss Celia admitted she had walked in the corridor near the library, but claimed she had not entered. Mrs. Dacre confessed she had lingered on the stairs, unable to sleep. Rupert said he had gone out onto the terrace for air, a statement that Poirot acknowledged with a polite bow that somehow made it feel provisional. When the body was turned, a folded slip of paper fell from the stranger's coat. O'Leary retrieved it, frowning. It bore only a single line, written in a firm, deliberate hand. Tonight, 11. The library. You will be paid. A blackmail meeting, then, said the sergeant. Or a trap, Poirot murmured. The pockets yielded little else. A few coins, a cheap watch, and a ticket stub from a railway station some 20 miles away. No wallet, no identification, Dr. Bellingham remarked again upon the ink stains on the man's fingers. Clerk or copyist, perhaps, he suggested. Poirot shook his head. Ink is democratic. What matters is the carelessness. He wrote recently, but not here, and he handled lamp oil, though no lamp has been lit. O'Leary looked around. If he was struck, where's the weapon? That, said Poirot, is a question the room refuses to answer. The body was removed at last, borne out with a solemnity that felt almost theatrical. The stain on the rug remained, a dark punctuation mark at the center of the library. Lady Imogen watched until the door closed, then sank into a chair. This is intolerable, she said. My guests, my house, this man. Poirot approached her gently. Madame, now tell me, has anyone threatened you? Asked for money? For silence? She hesitated, Harrow's gaze fixed on the floor. "There have been letters," she said at last. "Anonymous? They hinted at something in my past." "Nonsense, of course. I ignored them." Poirot smiled faintly. Blackmailers thrive on being ignored. It gives them courage. Harrow spoke sharply. "Why was this not mentioned before?" "Because," Lady Imogen replied coldly, "it was none of your concern." Poirot interposed smoothly. "And yet, monsieur, everything is my concern now, especially what is not said." When the others were dismissed to their rooms, Poirot lingered. He moved the chair back into alignment, straightened the curtain, replaced the decanter precisely where it must have stood before. Then he knelt and examined the floor near the desk. "Observe, Hastings," he said, "and here is where the man stood." He waited. He expected someone he trusted enough to meet alone, yet feared enough to demand payment. "You think one of us summoned him?" I said. "I am certain of it." "And the locked door?" Poirot smiled. "Locked doors are for honest men. This one was shut, not locked. Closed to create the illusion of privacy." He rose and glanced toward the shelves. "Books are excellent witnesses. They remember being disturbed." He removed a volume and revealed a small smear of oil on the wood behind it. His eyes brightened. "Ah," he said softly, "the lamp oil. Someone prepared the room earlier, in case the lights failed. That person anticipated darkness." Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Miss Celia appeared, pale but composed. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "there is something I should tell you, and I was afraid to before." Poirot inclined his head. "Fear is natural. Silence is optional." She took a breath. "I saw a man in the garden earlier this evening, not a guest. He spoke with Mr. Harrow by the hedge. I could not hear what was said, but Mr. Harrow gave him something. Money, perhaps." Harrow, who had returned unseen, stiffened. "That is absurd." Poirot turned to him, his voice courteous, his eyes merciless. "Absurd things, monsieur, are often the most carefully arranged." Miss Celia continued. "The man wore gloves." "Even then?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Gloves to hide ink-stained fingers." He clasped his hands behind his back. "You see, Hastings, the body should not have been there, which means someone else should. And the one who failed to arrive is, at this moment, far more dangerous than the one who did." As we left the library at last, the house seemed to breathe again, but uneasily, like a sleeper troubled by a dream whose meaning is not yet known. Morning came reluctantly to Hawthorne Grange, as if the house itself wished to delay examination. Poirot was already awake when I joined him, seated at the small table by the window, aligning crumbs from his toast with a precision that suggested thought. The library rug had been removed, he told me, yet its absence spoke louder than its presence. A stain, once known, could not be unseen. Nor, he added, could the expressions worn by our companions at breakfast. They watched one another too carefully. Lady Imogen presided with brittle courtesy, pouring tea as though it were a test of nerves. Harrow spoke little, his pen absent, his fingers restless without it. Sir Alister read the paper upside down. Miss Celia avoided everyone's eyes. Mrs. Dake watched all of this with a speculative calm that irritated me. Poirot ate sparingly and listened. When the servants withdrew, he set down his cup and smiled, a small domestic gesture before war. The moment felt deliberately chosen by him. No one interrupted him. He asked Miss Celia to remain, and the others to give him 10 minutes. There was resistance, but it dissolved under his polite insistence. When we were alone, she clasped her hands tightly and spoke at once. She had recognized the dead man, she said, from a solicitor's office in London. He copied documents, old letters. Weeks earlier, he had written to her, claiming knowledge of something concerning her father. She had destroyed the letter in fear. Yet memory lingered painfully. Despite her efforts alone, Poirot listened without interruption, his eyes gentle, his posture exact. When she finished, he thanked her as though she had given him a gift. Sir Alister's past, he explained later to me, was not as tidy as his public service suggested. Colonial accounts, vanished funds, convenient scapegoats. A clerk who copied letters might stumble upon inconvenient truths. Blackmail followed naturally, but blackmail did not require murder unless something went wrong. Fear changes the mathematics of risk, especially for proud men, with reputations to protect desperately. Sir Alister was next. He denied knowing the man, then denied it less firmly when Poirot mentioned London solicitors. His irritation flared, then cooled into hauteur. He admitted letters had come, absurd and unfounded, and that he had paid once to be rid of them. He had not arranged a meeting, he insisted. Poirot accepted this calmly, which seemed to unsettle him more than accusation would have. Men like him fear disgrace profoundly. It robs authority of its certainty. He showed that fear plainly then. Mrs. Dacre proved more forthcoming. She enjoyed secrets, she said, and had overheard Harrow arguing with Rupert on the terrace earlier that evening. Money again, and haste. Rupert had laughed, but not easily. When questioned, Rupert admitted meeting Harrow, but claimed it concerned debts of his own, nothing more. Poirot noted how often he smiled while speaking, as though trying to persuade himself first. Nervous vanity, Poirot later murmured. It betrays uncertainty rather than innocence. Harrow remained the most careful. Too careful, perhaps. In truth. By afternoon, the police returned with a name. The dead man was Edwin Cole, a copying clerk dismissed months earlier for drinking. He had recently come into modest money. Poirot received this without surprise. Cole, he said, had been paid in advance. Someone expected silence, not resistance. The blow delivered from behind spoke of panic. Yet panic from whom? The one who feared exposure or the one who feared discovery? That distinction mattered greatly to Poirot. It shaped the coming truth. And timing, always. Timing, as evening approached, tension thickened. Poirot asked Jenkins to leave the library door exactly as it had been last night. Then he requested all guests remain indoors after dinner. There were protests, quickly silenced. He explained nothing. Instead, he watched. At 10:55, he positioned himself in the corridor, drawing me beside him. The house settled. Footsteps echoed. Someone paused outside the library, then moved away. Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. The bait had been recognized, which meant the trap would close. Soon enough, I confess my nerves were strained. Poirot, however, seemed invigorated. He whispered that whoever had arranged the meeting expected to control events. By recreating the conditions, he had unsettled them. Someone now knew they were suspected. That knowledge would provoke action. We waited, listening to the house breathe. Somewhere a floorboard creaked not carelessly, but with intent. Poirot straightened, every line of him attentive, and smiled. It was the smile of certainty. The game had shifted irrevocably. Tomorrow he would speak openly. Tonight we waited. Sleep did not come easily that night. No, the house seemed alert, listening to itself. I lay awake, conscious of every sound, until a faint movement in the corridor stirred me fully. It was past midnight. I heard a door open, then close with exaggerated care. Moments later, Poirot tapped softly and entered, fully dressed, his expression composed but intent. He motioned me to follow without a word. We moved along the passage in silence. Ahead, a sliver of light escaped from beneath the library door. Poirot halted, listening. From within came the scrape of wood and the whisper of fabric. Someone was inside, alone. Poirot stepped forward decisively and opened the door. Rupert Satterthwaite spun around, his hand still on the desk drawer. His face flushed, then paled. On the desk lay a small metal object, dull and heavy. A paperweight. Its edge was darkened, recently cleaned, but imperfectly. "I wondered," Poirot said mildly, "who would feel the need to return here." Rupert stammered. He had lost something, he said. "A ring." Poirot nodded sympathetically, then picked up the paperweight, weighing it thoughtfully. "This would fit the hand," he said, "and the skull. One strike, delivered in fear." Rupert's shoulders sagged. "You cannot prove anything." "Proof is a comfort," Poirot replied. "Truth is a necessity." Footsteps sounded behind us. Harrow appeared, eyes sharp. He took in the scene at once. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Rupert, what are you doing?" Poirot turned. "Monsieur Harrow, you are punctual. That is your great flaw." Harrow stiffened. "Meaning?" "Meaning you planned everything," Poirot said calmly. "The letters, the payment, the meeting. Edwin Cole came to blackmail Sir Alistair. But Sir Alistair did not arrange to meet him. You did. You needed a body in this house. That is absurd." "Is it? You knew Cole copied old documents. You feared he had seen something else. Something involving you and certain financial irregularities you managed so carefully for Lady Imogen. You arranged to pay him, to frighten him into silence, but you also arranged an insurance policy." Poirot gestured to Rupert. "You knew this young man was reckless, in debt, desperate for money. You hinted that Cole meant to expose him. You encouraged him to come here, to confront Cole. You ensured the meeting would occur when the house was full. The confusion great." Rupert whispered, "You told me he would ruin me." "And you believed him," Poirot said gently. "Fear makes us obedient." Harrow laughed sharply. "Speculation." Poirot's eyes hardened. "You prepared the lamp oil in case of darkness. You placed the paperweight conveniently. You closed the door, but you miscalculated." Cole arrived early. Rupert confronted him, panicked, struck. You arrived moments later. The body was not where you expected it to be. It should not have been there. You intended to discover it, to guide suspicion toward Sir Alistair. Instead, chance betrayed you. Harrow's composure cracked. "You have nothing." "On the contrary," Poirot said. "You wrote the note. Cole's ink-stained fingers never touched it. Your handwriting betrays itself in the spacing, and you paid him in advance, which the police will confirm. Lastly, you returned tonight to remove the paperweight, forgetting that guilt is predictable." Sir Alistair appeared in the doorway, drawn by voices. He listened, rigid. Miss Celia stood behind him, her eyes bright with tears. Harrow's face collapsed inward, as though the structure holding it had been removed. "I only meant to frighten him," he said hoarsely. "He knew too much." Poirot nodded. "And fear frightened you in return." The police were summoned. Rupert wept openly. Harrow offered no resistance when led away. Dawn crept into the library, pale and unforgiving. Later, as we prepared to leave, Poirot stood a moment by the window. "You see, Hastings," he said softly, "the body should not have been there, but it was, and because of that, the truth insisted on being found." He adjusted his coat, immaculate as ever. "Order is restored, at least for now." Morning light revealed the aftermath with cruel clarity, and Hawthorne Grange seemed diminished by it. Servants moved quietly, as though sound itself were suspect. Sir Alistair kept to his room, emerging only to request a car. Lady Imogen received the police with composed dignity that trembled at the edges. Rupert was taken away later, subdued and broken, spared handcuffs only by circumstance. The house exhaled, but relief did not follow. Instead, there lingered a sense of unfinished reckoning that weighed heavily upon every remaining conscience. Poirot spent the morning answering questions with unfailing courtesy, offering clarity without ornament. He corrected assumptions gently, allowing others the dignity of comprehension. Sergeant O'Leary listened more than he spoke, increasingly aware that his conclusions followed paths already traced. When asked why he delayed his accusation, Poirot replied that certainty ripens best under observation. Fear, he explained, alters behavior, and altered behavior reveals alliances. Justice achieved too early risks, mistaking convenience for truth, a luxury he never indulged despite pressure from impatient minds and tempers. Lady Imogen requested a private word before our departure. She thanked Poirot formally, then more quietly, as one does when gratitude is complicated by shame. Harrow's betrayal cut deeply, she said, not for the crime alone, but for its intimacy. Trust, misplaced wounds, pride more than reputation. Poirot assured her that order, once restored, need not define memory. People, he observed, prefer symmetry, yet life insists upon irregularities. Wisdom lies in arranging what remains, not erasing what occurred, and accepting consequences with deliberate calm thereafter. We left Hawthorne Grange under a sky untroubled by conscience, the contrast unmistakable. And in the car I remarked upon the cruelty of chance, that Harrow's design had collapsed upon an innocent man's impulsive fear. Poirot corrected me at once. Rupert was not innocent, he said, only manipulated. Responsibility remains even when nudged. To excuse action because another suggested it is to abandon moral arithmetic. Men choose, even when choices are engineered. That, he concluded, is the true tragedy of intellect divorced from ethical restraint entirely. At the station, Poirot paused, gazing at the orderly platform with approval. He spoke then of Sir Alistair, whose disgrace would unfold quietly, cushioned by influence, yet sharpened by private remorse. Exposure, Poirot noted, is rarely symmetrical. Some suffer loudly, others inwardly. Miss Celia, he believed, would recover, strengthened by truth rather than secrecy. As for Lady Imogen, she would rebuild, for discipline comforted her. Scandal rearranges society, but character determines what survives the rearrangement once appearances are stripped away by circumstance and relentless inquiry. I asked Poirot whether the case troubled him more than most. He considered before answering, a habit I had learned to respect. The crime itself, he said, was ordinary enough. What lingered was the intent to mislead reason, to construct chaos, and call it inevitability. Such designs offended him personally. Order was not merely preference, but principle. To distort it deliberately was an insult to the mind. He smiled faintly then, adjusting his cuffs, restored by having answered that insult with clarity and final composure. The train carried us away, the countryside resuming its unremarkable beauty. Then I reflected that murder, when stripped of melodrama, is an intrusion into order, like a wrong note sustained too long. Poirot dozed briefly, his head inclined, the picture of satisfaction earned rather than assumed. When he woke, he remarked that bodies rarely belong where they are found, metaphorically speaking. People, he said, live many lives simultaneously, and death merely reveals which one they were inhabiting. It was a thought I found unsettling, yet persuasive. Later, as London approached, Poirot broke the silence with a mild observation that evil often overreaches because it mistakes cleverness for intelligence. Cleverness constructs, intelligence perceives. Harrow had been clever, Rupert impulsive, Sir Alistair evasive. None had truly perceived the whole. That task, Poirot suggested, falls to those willing to observe patiently without vanity. He adjusted his hat as the train slowed, immaculate and self-possessed. Another disorder corrected, another human failing catalogued, and the little grey cells satisfied, for the present at least once more. I could not help recalling Poirot's words from our first night that the dead do not make appointments. Cole had arrived seeking payment, believing leverage sufficient protection. He underestimated the volatility of fear, a misjudgment fatal to many who trade in secrets. Poirot observed that blackmail is a profession built upon borrowed courage. Once challenged, it collapses swiftly. As the city drew nearer, I felt the familiar gratitude of having witnessed order restored by intellect rather than force, and awareness that such restorations are temporary. Poirot gathered his things with customary neatness, preparing to resume the endless pattern of inquiry and resolution. Before we parted, he remarked that each case teaches the same lesson differently, and that repetition is the soul of understanding. Human nature, he said, resists improvement, but submits occasionally to illumination. He shook my hand warmly, already distant in thought. As I watched him depart into the crowd, I reflected that some minds restore balance simply by observing it honestly, and that is justice of all times. London received us with its usual indifference, the city swallowing conclusions as easily as it generates mysteries. Poirot walked beside me through the station, unhurried, as though nothing remained unresolved. Yet I sensed his thoughts still arranging themselves, aligning impressions into a final, the private symmetry of quiet intellectual satisfaction there. During tea at Poirot's flat, he spoke at last of matters left unsaid at Hawthorne Grange. Silence, he reminded me, is never empty. It merely conceals direction. The guilty fear questions, but the anxious fear answers. Observing which fear dominates often reveals more than testimony offered under pressure alone there. I asked whether he believed justice fully served. Poirot smiled faintly and corrected me. Justice, he said, is not a single act, but a condition temporarily restored. People mistake endings for solutions, yet consequences continue quietly, shaping lives long after verdicts satisfy public curiosity and private reckoning within memory endures. He returned then to the beginning, to the body itself. Edwin Cole, he observed, died because he misunderstood his position. The knowledge is leverage only when supported by judgment. Without it, secrets become weights, dragging those who carry them into dangers they imagine controllable but never truly are, as proven here. The conversation drifted, as it often does with Poirot, into character. Harrow, he said, possessed intelligence but lacked humility. Such men believe patterns belong to them alone. Rupert, by contrast, was governed by immediacy, mistaking urgency for necessity. Between them, tragedy found efficient passage through manipulation, fear, and convenient timing. I remarked upon Sir Alister's escape from public disgrace. Poirot did not dispute it. Exposure, he said, is unevenly distributed, yet inner reckoning may be harsher. Men accustomed to authority suffer deeply when their self-image fractures. So the private collapse can outweigh any official censure imposed by courts, society, or newspapers. As afternoon faded, Poirot grew reflective. Each case, he explained, leaves a residue upon the mind, a fine dust of understanding. It must be brushed away carefully, lest it cloud future perception. To dwell excessively on solved problems invites complacency, an enemy more dangerous than ignorance for any investigator indeed. We walked later along the embankment, the river indifferent to confession or concealment. Poirot paused, watching reflections distort familiar shapes. Truth behaves similarly, bending through perspective until examined from the proper angle. Only patience permits that alignment, and patience is increasingly unfashionable in modern society, particularly during moments of scandal. My thoughts returned to Hawthorne Grange, to the sense of intrusion that followed the body's discovery. Poirot suggested that crimes offend us because they disrupt expected narratives. We prefer lives to follow comprehensible arcs. Murder interrupts, forcing us to acknowledge disorder lurking beneath cultivated surfaces of civility, wealth, and routine. He spoke also of Hastings, meaning me and my usefulness. Friendship, he said kindly, provides contrast. One must hear reactions untrained by suspicion to test conclusions. The innocent eye notices dissonance differently. I accepted the compliment, though I suspected he granted it generously for encouragement. Habit and morale alike always. Evening settled, bringing with it the ordinary concerns of meals and correspondence. Poirot reviewed letters, already planning his next engagement. Disorder, once corrected, Mark invites repetition elsewhere. The world, he maintained, produces puzzles endlessly. Rest is permitted only briefly, like punctuation between demanding sentences written by human desire, fear, ambition endlessly. Before I left, he returned to the phrase that had lingered since the first night. The body should not have been there. Such moments, he explained, expose the fragile agreements governing society. When someone violates expectation violently, attention sharpens, and truths concealed by habit suddenly demand recognition from everyone involved. I asked whether he felt satisfaction. Poirot considered, then answered that satisfaction implies closure. He preferred resolution, which accepts imperfection. One cannot repair humanity, only understand it incrementally. Each case adds a fraction of clarity, never the whole. And to expect completeness is arrogance disguised as optimism, certainty, or moral haste. Walking home alone, I reflected upon his words. The affair had ended, yet its implications extended quietly outward. Lives altered, reputations adjusted, memories rewritten. Crime does not conclude with arrest, it reverberates. Perhaps that lingering echo is why Poirot never truly rests, only redirects his attention toward the next imbalance. The city lights flickered on, indifferent to individual reckonings. Somewhere, another secret would soon demand acknowledgement. I felt certain Poirot would be summoned again, his little grey cells restless when order phrase. Until then, memory would suffice, a record of intellect asserting itself against deliberate confusion and human frailty, always. In recalling Hawthorne Grange, I no longer saw the body, but the moment before discovery, when everything balanced precariously. That instant contained all possibilities. Poirot had sensed it, stepping carefully until truth tipped forward. Such balance, once lost, can never be restored exactly the same shape, meaning or certainty again. Perhaps that is the final lesson Poirot leaves behind. Order is temporary, vigilance continuous. We cherish symmetry because it reassures us, yet life resists neatness. The detective merely reminds us, briefly, that understanding is possible and that chaos yields, for a time, to thought through patience, discipline, humility, reason, always. The days that followed settled into a quieter rhythm, though the quiet felt provisional, like furniture arranged for guests who had not yet arrived. Poirot wrote his report with meticulous brevity, his declining embellishment. Facts, he said, require no decoration. Yet between the lines lay his understanding of motives, which he trusted others to discover belatedly. I received a note from Miss Celia, written with a steadiness that surprised me. She thanked Poirot for his kindness and confessed that truth, once faced, had relieved her more than ignorance ever had. Fear thrives on ambiguity, she wrote. Certainty, even painful, grants rest. Poirot smiled when I showed it to him, pleased not by gratitude but by clarity achieved. News arrived that Harrow had confessed fully. He admitted engineering the letters, arranging the meeting, and manipulating Rupert's panic. Rupert's own statement followed, fractured and remorseful. Sir Alister's lawyers moved swiftly. Public proceedings would be limited. Poirot expressed neither approval nor censure. Outcomes, he observed, follow influence as naturally as shadows follow light. One afternoon, Poirot invited me to accompany him to a small cafe he favored, orderly and discreet. There he spoke of timing, the invisible architecture of crime. Events do not merely happen, he said, they are placed. The murderer believes he controls sequence, but forgets that perception also moves independently. Witnesses notice at different speeds, drawing conclusions unpredictably. That unpredictability undoes careful plans. I asked whether the second visit to the library had been necessary. Poirot replied that guilt seeks completion. Those who commit crimes return mentally, then physically, compelled to correct imagined flaws. Anticipating that return transforms suspicion into certainty. It is not entrapment, but he insisted, but observation allowed to continue until it reveals itself completely. We walked back through streets humming with ordinary purpose. Poirot remarked upon how swiftly society resumes routine. Scandal flares, then dims. Yet those involved carry its heat longer. For the investigator, the task is not merely resolution, but containment, preventing one disruption from igniting others through rumor, resentment, or imitation, which spread easily. That evening, Poirot received an invitation to dine elsewhere. He declined politely, preferring solitude. Afterward, he sat by the window, watching lamplight trace patterns on the pavement. He spoke quietly, almost to himself, about Edwin Cole. A minor man, he said, but not insignificant. His death mattered not for who he was, but for what it revealed. Every life intersects others invisibly, yet until a moment forces acknowledgement. I considered the phrase again. The body that should not have been there. Poirot explained that such bodies expose hidden arrangements. They interrupt expectations, compelling examination. Without interruption, false order persists comfortably. Crime, paradoxically, illuminates structure by breaking it. The detective merely interprets the illumination, translating shock into comprehension. Poirot prepared to depart for another case. As he packed, he remarked that he prefers mysteries with clear beginnings and endings, though life rarely provides them. The art lies in framing complexity without distorting it. One must resist the temptation to simplify beyond truth. Precision is kindness, he said, both to the living and the dead. Before leaving, he paused and adjusted a photograph on the mantel, once aligning it precisely. Order restored, even in small things, reassures the mind. He turned to me with a familiar smile, warm yet reserved. There will always be another affair, Hastings, he said. Disorder is inventive. Reason must be equally so. When he left, the room felt momentarily larger, then emptier. I reflected that Poirot's presence imposes shape upon chaos, briefly but decisively. The world resists such imposition, yet yields enough to make the effort worthwhile. Perhaps that is why his work never truly ends. Weeks later, I heard that Hawthorne Grange had been sold. Lady Imogen sought a different symmetry elsewhere. Places remember, Poirot once told me. They hold echoes that trouble those attuned to them. New walls, new gardens. Yet the past lingers quietly, influencing choices unacknowledged. As for me, the memory arranged itself gradually, smoothing sharper edges. The affair receded, leaving behind its lesson. The body that should not have been there forced truth into the open, exacting a price from everyone involved. Such intrusions are unwelcome, yet necessary. Without them, deception grows comfortable. I realized then that Poirot's true achievement is not merely solving crimes, but restoring proportion. He reminds us that actions carry weight, that motives matter, and that intellect, properly applied, can oppose fear. In that opposition lies hope, modest but persistent. Life resumed, imperfectly ordered. Somewhere, another imbalance formed. I felt certain Poirot would respond when summoned, his little grey cells attentive as ever. Until then, the memory of his method remained, a quiet assurance that even when chaos intrudes unexpectedly, and understanding is possible, and that sometimes is enough. I keep that assurance close. In recalling the affair, I see not merely events, but a discipline of thought, steady and humane. It does not promise perfection, only coherence. In a world quick to judge and forget, such coherence endures quietly, shaping how one listens, waits, and chooses. That, perhaps, is Poirot's lasting gift. It lingers beyond solutions, patient, exacting, and unexpectedly consoling always. It was some days later that Poirot sent for me again, not with urgency, but with that courteous precision which always suggested a final adjustment remained. I found him in his flat, the table cleared, the air of completion about him unmistakable. He handed me a letter without comment. It was from Sergeant O'Leary. New information, it said. The railway clerk remembered Edwin Cole distinctly. Cole had not travelled alone. Another man had waited with him on the platform, spoken briefly, then departed before the train arrived. Description followed. Tall, precise, carrying himself like a man accustomed to being obeyed. Sir Alistair. Poirot watched my reaction. You see, he said softly, the body was not the only thing misplaced. Sir Alistair had lied, Poirot continued. He had paid Cole once, as admitted, but fear had not ended there. He went himself to the station, intending to cancel the meeting, to reclaim control. Cole refused. Words were exchanged. Sir Alistair left in anger, believing the matter unresolved but contained. When the murder occurred, his relief was immediate, his silence absolute. He did not kill, Poirot said, but he set the machinery in motion. Moral responsibility is rarely singular. I asked whether this changed anything. Poirot shook his head. The law requires actions. Conscience requires understanding. Sir Alistair will suffer the latter. It is sufficient. He folded the letter carefully and placed it away. I wished you to know, he added, because truth once assembled should not be partially dismantled. We spoke then of endings. Stories, Poirot remarked, pretend to conclude, but reality resists the curtain. Rupert would serve a sentence, shortened by contrition. Harrow's cleverness would avail him nothing. Lady Imogen would reorder her life with determination. Miss Celia would carry knowledge like a scar that strengthens tissue around it. And Cole? I asked. Poirot's expression softened. He will be forgotten quickly. That is the final injustice. But for a moment, his life mattered greatly. Enough to expose others. That is not nothing. Outside, the city moved with habitual purpose. Poirot stood, straightened a book, and smiled faintly. You notice, Hastings, how often evil relies on secrecy, while good relies on patience. Before I left, he returned to a thought that had preoccupied him. The library, he said, had been chosen not for convenience, but symbolism, a place of records, knowledge, preserved order. To introduce death, there was an unconscious confession by the conspirator that knowledge itself was the threat. One cannot fear what one does not value. As I walked away, I reflected that Poirot's triumphs are rarely loud. They arrive quietly, like correct answers placed gently upon disorder. The affair at Hawthorne Grange would fade into footnotes, yet its lessons lingered, precise and unsettling. That evening, alone, I reread my notes. The pattern emerged clearly now. Fear answered by manipulation, manipulation answered by chance, chance answered by intellect. The body that should not have been there forced alignment upon crooked intentions. Poirot once told me that harmony is not the absence of conflict, but the resolution of it. In that sense, the affair achieved harmony at last, imperfect but real. The house, the people, even the memory found new positions, less comfortable perhaps, but honest. I closed the notebook, aware that another summons would come. It always does. Until then, I held fast to the assurance that minds like Poirot's exist, vigilant, exacting, restoring proportion, when human designs collapse under their own cleverness. In that knowledge lies a quiet peace, earned rather than assumed, and therefore enduring. I have often considered since how easily the affair might have ended differently, resolved by accident or buried by influence. A later train, a steadier hand, a quieter conscience, and Hawthorne Grange would have slept on undisturbed, its secrets intact. That is the unsettling truth Poirot understands so well. Detection is not the triumph of inevitability, but the victory of attention applied at the fragile moment when disorder reveals itself. Miss that moment, and corruption settles comfortably again. Remembering this, I find myself more observant, less certain, slower to judge. Poirot would approve of that restraint. It is not suspicion he cultivates, but discernment. In the end, the affair left no monument, no inscription, only a rearrangement of understanding. The body that should not have been there served its grim purpose and vanished, but the correction it demanded persists quietly. Perhaps that is all justice can promise. Not permanence, but alignment restored long enough for decency to regain its footing, and for reason, patiently exercised, to remind us that chaos is never final. Such reflections accompany me now, shaping memory into caution rather than regret, and gratitude rather than triumph. If Poirot taught me anything enduring, it is that thought, honestly applied, is a moral act. One may fail, hesitate, or arrive too late, yet still choose clarity over comfort. That choice, repeated quietly, is how order survives, imperfectly, against the persistent ingenuity of human self-deception. It endures because minds like Poirot's insist upon responsibility, proportion, and patience, even when the world prefers haste, certainty, noise, and forgetting entirely too often now. When I saw Poirot next, it was not at a crime scene or a railway platform, but in his flat, where everything had returned to its customary exactness. The affair had receded into memory, yet he regarded it once more, turning it gently like a crystal, catching the final light within. He spoke of Hawthorne Grange not as a place of violence, but as a study in imbalance. Each person there, he said, had lived with a private disorder, carefully concealed. The body merely forced those disorders into collision. That, he observed, is why such crimes feel shocking. They expose the fragile scaffolding upon which civility rests. We do not fear death alone, but revelation. In that house, revelation arrived uninvited, and everyone reacted according to their nature. Poirot found no satisfaction in that, only confirmation. Human beings, he reflected, are consistent when frightened, and fear reveals patterns more reliably than comfort ever does. He poured chocolate with deliberate care and remarked that endings are rarely endings at all. They are pauses, places where the mind may rest briefly before disorder asserts itself again. The mistake, he warned gently, is to mistake pause for permanence. Order must be renewed, not assumed, and vigilance is the price of all harmony. That, he concluded, is why the little grey cells are never truly at leisure. He asked me then what I would remember most clearly. I answered without hesitation that I would remember the moment when the body was first seen, and how everything changed around it. Poirot smiled and corrected me. I would remember, he said, the moment just before, though I might not realize it yet. Memory edits itself, removing the stillness that precedes catastrophe, yet that stillness contains the truth of events. At Hawthorne Grange, before the cry, before the bell, there had been a perfect alignment of secrets and fear. The crime was already complete in intention long before the blow was struck. Poirot insisted that detection is not about discovering what happened, but when it became inevitable. That inevitability, he said, is born in thought, not action. Harrow's first decision, Rupert's first fear, Sir Alister's first compromise, each tightened the path until chance alone determined who would fall. The body, wrongly placed, revealed the path by interrupting it. Without interruption, our inevitability continues unchallenged. Poirot paused, then added quietly that such understanding does not excuse, but it explains. Explanation, he believes, is the beginning of restraint, and restraint the only reliable defense against repetition. Later, walking together through the city, he spoke of justice once more, but differently. Justice, he said, is a human arrangement, necessary yet imperfect. It satisfies the need for conclusion, but not the need for meaning. Meaning belongs to the individual conscience. Sir Alister would live with knowledge he could never publicly confront. Rupert would carry the weight of his action longer than any sentence. Harrow, stripped of cleverness, would confront emptiness where superiority once lived. These outcomes were not symmetrical, yet they were aligned. Poirot believed alignment sufficient. One perfect balance, he argued, exists only in abstraction. Human affairs settle for proportion, and wisdom lies in recognizing when proportion has been restored. He stopped, straightened his coat, and remarked that society forgives many things, but not confusion. People accept injustice more readily than uncertainty. A solved crime reassures, even if consequences are uneven. That reassurance, Poirot admitted, has value. It allows ordinary life to resume. Yet he warned against trusting reassurance too deeply. The same habits that permit injustice to persist also permit crimes to gestate unnoticed. Comfort dulls perception. Only discomfort sharpens it. For that reason, he said, the detective must remain slightly uncomfortable always, even in victory. As we parted, Poirot said something that lingered with me long afterward, till he observed that the body which should not have been there served as a reminder, not a symbol. Symbols simplify. Reminders complicate. They ask us to look again at what we think we know. In Hawthorne Grange, everyone believed they understood their own position, their own risks. The body contradicted those beliefs. Contradiction is painful, but necessary. Without it, error hardens into character. Poirot adjusted his hat and smiled. The matter settled. For him, the case was complete not because the culprit was named, but because the pattern was understood. Naming follows understanding, not the reverse. That, he said, is the discipline of thought. Watching him go, I reflected that Poirot's gift is not brilliance alone, but patience applied relentlessly. He waits for truth to present itself fully, refusing shortcuts offered by assumption or convenience. In doing so, he restores not innocence, but coherence. That is a quieter achievement, and perhaps the only one that endures. The affair ended, as all affairs do, not with certainty, but with clarity sufficient for life to continue honestly, if not comfortably. In the days that followed, I found myself more attentive, listening for pauses, watching for misalignments. Poirot's influence persists that way, subtly rearranging one's habits of thought. The world remains disorderly, secrets plentiful, motives mixed. Yet I no longer expect symmetry where none can exist. Instead, I look for proportion, for the moment when understanding becomes possible. The body that should not have been there forced such a moment upon everyone involved. Its absence now does not erase that lesson. Perhaps that is the final outcome Poirot values most. Crimes pass, criminals are judged, houses change hands. What remains is the reminder that thought, carefully exercised, can interrupt inevitability. It cannot perfect humanity, but it can restrain it. That restraint, renewed each time someone chooses clarity over comfort, is the fragile order we rely upon. Poirot understands this instinctively. His little grey cells do not seek triumph, only alignment. Watching him work, one learns that alignment is never permanent, but it is always worth restoring. That belief, quietly held, is his true legacy, and the reason his departures feel less like endings than intervals before the next necessary act of attention. When at last I took my leave of Poirot, the affair seemed sealed, yet he insisted upon one final conversation, as if symmetry demanded it. He spoke calmly, without flourish, summing the case not as drama, but as lesson. Fear, he said, had been the true architect, building structures clever men mistook for control. Each participant supplied a brick willingly. The crime merely exposed the design. Poirot observed that society prefers villains to patterns because patterns implicate us all. That discomfort, he added, is precisely why understanding matters. Without it, repetition becomes inevitable, quietly reproducing the same errors endlessly again. He returned briefly to Edwin Cole, not to elevate him, but to restore proportion. Cole, he said, had traded in secrets without appreciating their weight. Knowledge demands judgment, or it collapses into liability. Poirot regretted the man's death, not sentimentally, but intellectually, because it represented waste. A life ended not for truth, but for the avoidance of it. Such deaths, he remarked, are the most pointless, for they resolve nothing by themselves. Only inquiry gives them meaning, transforming loss into warning rather than spectacle. That transformation, he believed, justified the detective's task, however imperfect, limited, or quietly uncelebrated by society today. I asked him whether he ever doubted in the crucial moment when accusation must replace contemplation. Poirot smiled and said, "Doubt is permanent. Decision is temporary. One acts not because doubt vanishes, but because delay would permit greater harm. In this case, he waited until behavior betrayed intention, until guilt sought completion. That patience, he insisted, distinguishes reasoning from guesswork. And to accuse without comprehension is merely another form of violence. He prefers persuasion by logic, allowing truth to corner itself without coercion or theatrical display. This method, he concluded, respects both justice and humanity, refusing shortcuts born of impatience alone. As our conversation drew to its natural close, Poirot rose and adjusted his mustaches, an unconscious signal that equilibrium had been restored. He observed that people crave endings because they fear reflection. An ending absolves them from reconsidering earlier choices, yet reflection, he said, is the true safeguard. Hawthorne Grange would fade from headlines, but its lesson need not. When comfort returns too quickly, memory dulls, and old errors resume their familiar authority. Only those willing to remember disruption can resist repeating it. Such resistance, what he believed, defines maturity, whether personal, moral, or collective within society, over time and history. We parted with his customary courtesy, and I stepped back into the ordinary noise of London, feeling subtly recalibrated. The affair had ended without spectacle, yet it lingered like a corrected misprint one cannot unsee. I realized that Poirot's genius lies not in revelation alone, but in restraint. He removes excess, leaving only what must be faced. That discipline unsettles more deeply than accusation. It obliges one to think. Perhaps that is why his solutions endure quietly, long after the excitement of scandal has passed. They persist as habits of thought, shaping judgment even in unrelated moments, later on, life. Looking back, I see the affair not as tragedy alone, but as correction. Lives were damaged, certainly, and yet illusions were dismantled. Poirot accepts such costs soberly. He does not romanticize justice, nor does he despair of it. He understands its limits and works precisely within them. That precision is ethical. It avoids the cruelty of exaggeration and the laziness of indifference. In restoring proportion, he restores responsibility, reminding us that choice remains, even when circumstances narrow it severely. This reminder, quietly delivered, lingers longer than punishment, influencing future decisions unseen and unacknowledged by others across years and lives thereafter continually. I sometimes imagine Hawthorne Grange now, occupied by strangers unaware of its former tensions. They walk its rooms without sensing the fragile moment when truth intruded. Yet spaces, like minds, retain impressions. A misplaced object, a pause too long, can awaken dormant questions. Poirot would say that vigilance begins there. Not suspicion, but attentiveness. The willingness to notice what does not fit and to ask why. That habit, once learned, becomes difficult to abandon, even when peace appears restored. It reshapes perception permanently, ensuring comfort never entirely silences curiosity or moral alertness again within thoughtful minds everywhere at all times. Poirot himself would dismiss such reflections with a modest gesture, preferring chocolate in order to philosophy. Yet philosophy underpins his method. He believes reason is humane precisely because it restrains impulse. Violence, accusation, haste all appeal to emotion. Reason appeals to responsibility. In choosing it, Poirot affirms faith in the mind's capacity to govern behavior. That faith, though tested repeatedly, remains intact. Without it, detection would be meaningless, reduced to mechanism rather than moral endeavor. It is this moral dimension, quietly asserted, that elevates his work beyond puzzles into enduring acts of civic conscience shared by attentive observers everywhere today. As for me, I remain grateful for having witnessed such discipline firsthand. Friendship with Poirot has altered my understanding of courage. It is not loud nor forceful, but patient. It waits, listens, and acts only when alignment demands it. That patience is difficult in a world enamored of speed. Yet speed obscures nuance. The affair taught me that restraint is not weakness, but strength refined. One need not dominate events to guide them toward resolution. Such guidance, practiced quietly, respects human fallibility while insisting upon accountability and thoughtful consequence without humiliation, cruelty, or needless theatricality imposed upon others unnecessarily ever. Thus the affair concludes, not with triumph, but with composure. Poirot departs as he always does, leaving behind no spectacle, only understanding. The body that should not have been there has served its purpose, demanding attention, correction, and thought. In its absence, order resumes, altered yet coherent. That coherence is fragile, requiring renewal. Poirot trusts others to undertake that work, armed with clearer sight. For my part, I carry forward his example, confident that reason, patiently applied, remains humanity's most reliable instrument. It is a quiet faith, tested endlessly, yet sufficient to oppose chaos without surrendering dignity in our lives.